Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review. The Israeli Defense Forces now thoroughly investigating the violent clashes seen over the weekend along the Israel-Gaza border. Clashes which allowed an Israeli soldier to be shot in the head at point-blank range. And the findings so far, as expected, not very encouraging.
בוקר טוב לכולם. ראשית אני רוצה לשלוח איחולי החלמה מהירה ותפילה לרפואתו של לוחם מג"ב סמל ראשון בראל חדריה שמואלי. אנחנו נבוא חשבון עם מי שפוגע בלוחמים שלנו ובאזרחי ישראל.
Strong words from Prime Minister Naftali Bennett at the start of the weekly cabinet meeting on Sunday. But initial IDF investigations are placing Shmueli's shooting at the IDF's feet. The military probe into the massive Palestinian riots along the northern Gaza border last Saturday, stating that Israeli troops were severely underprepared and blinded at times to the danger. And the IDF already suggesting a few explanations. First, soldiers were reportedly surprised by the size of the crowds, having expected fewer people. Then, when the huge crowds began to rush the border, the IDF refrained from immediately opening fire for fear of hitting civilians nearby. And finally, once the crowds got close enough, strong defenses became liabilities, i.e. the small sniper hole transformed from a good defense into a funnel for enemy fire, which soldiers could not see coming. Soldiers like 21-year-old Staff Sergeant Barel Hadaria Shmueli, who was left in critical condition with a bullet wound to the head. In any case, Bennett vowing that Hamas will pay a heavy price, though proper retaliation, as Bennett defines it, may take time, as negotiations with Hamas are ongoing. Instead, then, other pressures are mounting. Egypt, for one, announcing the full closure of the Rafah border crossing with Gaza, starting Monday and lasting until further notice. Hamas, for its part, however, alleging that the shooting was a, quote, independent, unplanned action by a single individual who decided to respond to the sniper, end quote. Likewise, the IDF confirming that Hamas's supposed restraining forces were present on the border. But analysts expect that this narrative is purely for relieving some of the pressures placed on Hamas by Egypt. In fact, some Hebrew media, citing unspecified sources, saying that the gunman was himself a member of the Hamas restraining force. And Arab media monitor Abu Ali Express reporting that armed factions in the Strip are already planning to renew clashes along the southern Gaza border near Khan Yunis Wednesday afternoon. Tensions in the south along the border with Gaza continuing to rise as terrorists use incendiary and explosive balloons to spark at least 9 fires on Monday afternoon alone. And the IDF, for its part, responding with airstrikes. Israeli Air Force fighters striking several Hamas targets overnight on Tuesday, including a weapons factory, a tunnel entrance, and an underground rocket launcher placed right next to a Palestinian school. This in retaliation against a recent uptick in terror along the Gaza-Israel border, including massive renewed rioting, cross-border shootings, and most recently, the resumption of incendiary balloons. Fire and rescue services responding to at least 9 fires across the southern Eshkol region on Monday, and Hamas previously threatening to continue riots into Wednesday. Hamas and other Palestinian terror groups in the Strip reportedly considered their sporadic attacks as pressure on Israel to ease restrictions on the Strip. Hamas allegedly trying to draw a more forceful response from the IDF, which Hamas can then retaliate against and use at the bargaining table during ongoing ceasefire talks with Israel in Egypt, though the violence seemingly backfiring for now. Egypt has indefinitely closed the Rafah border as punishment for Hamas's recent actions, and only Israel's crossing remains open for aid, humanitarian or otherwise. Israel also okayed the transfer of Qatari funding via the UN, and all this in apparent efforts to bolster the ceasefire talks. In fact, the only thing preventing a stronger response from Israel already is reportedly the upcoming meetings between Prime Minister Bennett and Presidents al-Sisi from Egypt and Biden from the US. That said, Israel's hesitancy to engage more heavily with Hamas may soon come to an end. Israeli authorities have repeatedly vowed to respond to every aggression from Gaza, and security officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, saying that another war between Israel and Gaza terror groups likely inevitable. In other news, Israelis over 40 now eligible for their 3rd COVID vaccine booster shots, and the effects of the boosters thus far are very encouraging. The rate of serious new infections continuing to fall, despite infections in general continuing slightly to rise.
So we had the 60s, 50s, now 40s. We're giving them 3rd vaccines, and I think it's the only way to get out of the pandemic and the only way to finish with all of this, and I think everybody needs to come and do it as soon as it's possible.
We believe that the third booster shot is important to overcome the waning immunity that we see among the elderly who have received their shots over 5 months ago, and in order to properly mitigate the impact of the Delta variant on the Israeli population in view of the ensuing rates of infection and the increasing rates of severe morbidity that are threatening to reach the surge capacity of our hospital system in a month or so.
Meantime, although already using Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines, Israel's still testing its own homegrown concoction, BreLife, created by the IIBR, which is under the Defense Ministry's umbrella. And high doses of the drug, currently in clinical trials, may provide even longer-term protections than the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that most Israelis have received. But arguably most importantly is not vaccines at all. Israeli researchers also still testing a COVID treatment, which if proven effective could render the virus virtually toothless. Mesencure by Bonus Bio Group now heading for phase 2 clinical trials, with any interested Israeli and Greek hospitals invited to join in. And the results so far looking incredible, with 88% of serious patients released from hospital within just days of receiving their last dose of the drug. The drug, discovered to reduce inflammation and alleviate respiratory symptoms, among other issues caused by COVID-19. Most impressively, at least 90% of the patients aged 45 to 75 also had comorbidities. Now, regardless of regulations and restrictions, the best way to avoid coronavirus infection remains vaccination, particularly if you want to avoid serious or critical illness. At least so says recent health reports. And with Israel playing the part of vaccine lab rat for the entire world, there's plenty of data now to back it up. The third dose of the COVID-19 vaccine is proving 95% effective against the virus, including the Delta variant, some 2 weeks after receipt. And even if infected, it's at least 97% effective against serious symptoms too. This according to the latest from the Israeli Health Ministry data, which is closely tracking the health of over 1.67 million Israelis that have received the booster shot thus far. Of course, vaccines come with their own risks, and many concerned critics are pointing to several adverse side effects that have been associated with the drugs. That said, new research from Israel published to the New England Journal of Medicine showing that unvaccinated patients face far scarier odds if infected, both in terms of the virus and its related issues. Individuals who received the Pfizer vaccine, for example, have been reported to suffer from myocarditis or inflammation of the heart. But unvaccinated people who get COVID are 4 times more likely to develop this condition. Likewise, among the 24 other potential side effects of the vaccine, patients are most likely to experience swollen lymph nodes, appendicitis, and herpes zoster, which can lead to chickenpox and shingles. But unvaxxed patients face greatly increased risk of not just myocarditis, but pericarditis, arrhythmias, heart attacks, strokes, pulmonary embolism, deep vein thrombosis, acute kidney damage, and more. So please, if you're eligible, go and get your vaccination. Moving on, a state inquiry into the horrific Mount Meron stampede that left 45 people dead is now hearing testimonies, and the police's Northern Command Chief, Shimon Levi, speaking as the first witness.
אירוע מירון זה אירוע המשמעותי ביותר במשטרת ישראל. מן הסתם הוא המשמעותי ביותר גם למחוז הצפוני, ואני בראשו.
So far, gross negligence from officials organizing and guarding the event is becoming abundantly clear. Levi explaining that police were left completely out of the loop regarding regulations at the festival. Additionally, Levi stressing that officials were underprepared to respond to the havoc, adding that he was informed only a day prior to the pilgrimages that no pandemic-related measures would be in place. On the other hand, Rabbi Shmuel Rabinovich, rabbi of the Western Wall and Holy Sites, denying any knowledge of the dangers, telling the commission that organizers, quote, didn't know there was a problem, and that nobody told us there was an issue with the Dove Bridge. That said, the Meron tragedy coming after years and years of continued warnings, arguing that the venue was not safe for such an event. In fact, some reports, such as the one issued by the Fire and Rescue Services, was issued just 8 days before the Lag BaOmer incident, and it came complete with a specific list of necessary repairs and areas of concern, all of which were ignored. In any case, you can decide for yourself whether or not you believe organizers are guilty. The hearings are open to the public and are available for streaming online, with former Supreme Court Chief Miriam Naor heading the panel and reporting any suspicions to the Israeli Attorney General. Now, as the Jewish high holidays begin, thousands of worshipers are expected to visit the Western Wall Plaza in Jerusalem. So the Health Ministry and the Western Wall Heritage Foundation partnering to prepare the space for safely handling the crowds. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
כמו שאנחנו נוהגים מדי שנה, אנחנו גם השנה הזאת, ערב ראש השנה תשפ"ב, מפנים את הפתקים מנדבכי הכותל המערבי. יש כאן פתקים מכל העולם.
Twice a year, every year, for at least the last 3 centuries, a rabbi with the Western Wall Heritage Foundation arrives with a team of cleaners to clear out thousands of prayer notes from between the cracks of the stones at the holy site. And assuming the notes bear the name of God in writing, they're buried atop the Mount of Olives. But that's not the only annual tradition now beginning. It's just the only tradition seemingly unaffected by coronavirus. Every year, as the summer ends, hundreds of thousands of Jews arrive to pray at the Western Wall. The visitors asking God and their community members for forgiveness, or slichot, before Rosh Hashanah, or the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So, to prevent the events from becoming COVID superspreader incidents, Israeli authorities taking preemptive action. Starting Thursday, August 26, the Western Wall Plaza will be divided into prayer capsules, with separation barriers being erected. Entry will also only be limited to 10,000 worshippers at a time, and all visitors will be required to wear masks and adhere to instructions from ushers. Perhaps most importantly, though, the Western Wall Heritage Foundation asking visitors to arrive early in the evenings for services and to try to come in the earlier days of the Slichot period itself, rather than overcrowding the holy site at the last minute before the holidays. If overcrowding becomes an issue, entry will be closed. Then finally, for those who can't make it, Slichot services will be live-streamed at thekotel.org every midnight on the following days until the eve of Yom Kippur, September 14th. Hannah Rifkin, ILTV.
Moving on, major congratulations are in order. An explosive first day for Israel at the 2020-2021 Summer Paralympic Games, as Arab-Israeli swimmer Iyad Shalabi has taken gold in the 100-meter backstroke final. Hatikva, Israel's national anthem, playing even earlier than anticipated in Tokyo this week, as 34-year-old Israeli swimmer Iyad Shalabi stunned the world with his incredible start to this year's Paralympic Games. Shalabi placing first out of 6 in the 100-meter backstroke final Wednesday morning, the first day of the competition, with a time of 2 minutes and 28.04 seconds. And thus Shalabi becoming the first ever Arab Israeli to win a gold medal at the Paralympics. His medal being Israel's 375th from the Paralympics in general, though, and the 167th for swimming. Shalabi's coach, Yaakov Binenson, choking back tears, though, saying that he's very excited that the gold went to Shalabi because this is his 4th Olympics, and he was always in 4th place, but he kept going, proving that persistence truly pays off. Likewise, Shalabi's father, Yusuf, saying that he was so thrilled for his son that he cried, adding that Iyad's been training for over 6 years. Meanwhile, as for how the race was decided so fast, there were no qualifiers or semifinals for the competition due to the small number of participants competing with Shalabi's same degree of disability. Shalabi grew up in Shfarram, an Arab-majority city in Israel's north, and while born partially deaf and mute, it wasn't until age 12 that he also became a paraplegic, losing the use of both legs after falling from a rooftop. Shalabi has also previously been featured in the documentary short Swimming Against the Current, which follows his experiences around the 2015 World Championships in Scotland. Now, in other news, COVID may be in the headlines, but it's far from the only disease for which incredible and recent advances have been made. Scientists at Tel Aviv University now publishing amazing progress with brain cancer. Hannah Rifkin with the report.
An historic moment in the fight against cancer. Israeli researchers have now found a way to use patients' own cells in a form of 3D printing material. And they use this biomaterial to make a model of the patient's tumors in which doctors can test the efficacy of potential treatments before trying them out for real in the body. And to complicate things further, the scientists from Tel Aviv University focusing on glioblastoma, or the most common form of brain cancer in adults. A cancer which is also among the most aggressive, carrying with it a very poor prognosis. The authors of the study, published in the Journal of Science Advances, explain that current tumor and cancer models just didn't do the job.
One thing that we identified was that the models are incorrect. The models we are using for decades are of only cancer cells on a petri dish that is made of rigid plastic that doesn't have any resemblance to the brain of the patient or of people in general. And what we wanted to create is a 3D as opposed to two-dimensional plate where we grow the cells in a gel that mimics the tissue of the brain much more accurately, and hence this translates to the behavior of the cancer cells.
Meanwhile, contributing to the model's realism,
we added other cell types that are the environment of the brain, those resident cells in the brain, like immune cells and other cells that usually sit in the brain, and blood vessels, functional blood vessels that we can flow through them, drugs and immune cells, red and white blood cells of the same patient.
Finally, once printed, the researchers pump the imitation tumor with the patient's blood, followed by the potential treatment. And a treatment is deemed promising if either the printed tumor shrinks or if metabolic activity is lowered against control groups. Ofra Benny, who leads similar research at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, calling the study a potential game changer in the field of personalized medicine.
Israel now welcoming its first ever private university, the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, and this as the IDC finally receiving official university status by Israel's Council for Higher Education 27 years after its founding. But ILTV's Asaf Nissan has the details.
The Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, or IDC in short, has been known as one of the most prestigious private colleges in the state of Israel. Established in 1994, with high-end facilities, top-of-the-line teachers, and an academic level that is equal to that of the Ivy League schools in the U.S. But now, the school is about to go to the next level. Israel's Council for Higher Education, headed by Education Minister Yifat Shasha Biton, has officially approved its status as a university.
It feels like modern-day Zionism is being created here at IDC Herzliya by our being declared Israel's first private and non-profit university.
ואני מרגישה גאה שהייתה לי הזכות הזו להיות חלק מאלה שתופרים בסוף את ההכרה שלכם כאוניברסיטה חדשה במדינה היקרה שלנו.
The university, which will be called Reichman University, will be the first private university in the state of Israel and will be named after the founder and the president of the IDC, Professor Uriel Reichman.
This has been the vision and dream of Professor Reichman for the last 27 years, fighting bureaucracy, and basically it's a dream come true. This university was founded with a mission statement of Zionism. The university was actually created in order to create new leadership for the state of Israel, for the Jewish world and the world at large.
From day one, he saw it as a university. That was the goal that he set to himself.
And according to former Education Minister Amnon Rubinstein, Israel will join the countries that have excellent private elite institutions.
אנחנו מדברים על מוסד אקדמי איכותי, אנחנו מדברים על מוסד אקדמי שיודע לקדם מחקר, אנחנו מדברים על מוסד אקדמי שבסוף כשמקלפים את הכל, מגיע לו לקבל את ההכרה כאוניברסיטה.
But not everyone is happy about this change, as some voices have called out against this decision, since a private university might create new classes in society where only the rich and well-connected may be able to afford learning there.
So when you walk in the campus of IDC, you see a very good mixture of Israelis and international students. And the common denominator is the passion. Is the passion to learn, is the passion to innovate, it's the passion to be actually a leading star for the Israeli academia.
There has been so many efforts by the public universities to prevent us becoming a university, and I think we have shown them that justice has been done today.
But despite it all, IDC has finally reached their goal and became a university, thus finally competing with the other universities in Israel, saving one difference. IDC will still continue to be a private school without any need for government funding.
We never asked for a penny from the Israeli government. And everything you see here in front of you is something which we created ourselves without taking any tax dollars from the state of Israel, tax shekels from the state of Israel. Okay, and it's very, very fulfilling. We have the largest international school in the country. I'm privileged to be the head of it. It's tremendously satisfying that all of these students who came to study here in a college can now put on their CV that they graduated a university and not a college. And it's been a long time coming. Just like in the 1980s, we privatized the Israeli telephone company, and instead of taking 8 years to get a telephone, it took 8 minutes.
Asaf Nissan.
Now, talk about reaching for the stars. For our final story tonight, our pasts and futures meeting up in lower Earth orbit. This is Eitan Stibe, Israel's second ever astronaut to be, now planning to take a nearly 2,000-year-old Jewish coin into space with him. Eli Escosido, head of the Israel Antiquities Authority, presented Stibe with the coin on Sunday in Jerusalem. But before that, the coin was discovered fairly recently in the so-called Cave of Horrors, and it dates back to year 2 of the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans, the second Jewish revolt against the Romans, which took place around 133 CE, or 1900 years ago. Additionally, the coin bears the name of the Jewish rebel leader, Prince Shimon Bar Kokhba. Of course, the coin, not the only piece of Israel that is set to accompany Stibe into the International Space Station. Stibe saying that he'll be taking, quote, a bag filled with items that have special significance to him, at least one of which had to be a symbol of Jewish history and connection to the land. Finally, Stibe is slated to fly to the ISS on January 2022 aboard the SpaceX Axiom Space One rocket. And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.